Hey, welcome back to this experimental live read, Adult Brain Audiobooks. I'm Graham, one of the narrators. I was just looking at my camera there. It's showing more than it usually shows on one side, but it's not a big deal. So today we're going to be reading chapter 8 in the book Ancient America in Notes on American Archaeology by John D. Baldwin from 1871. Super interesting what they knew or what they thought about the mysteries of America and Central America back then in the 1800s. Today's chapter will be American Ancient History, talking about the old books, the ancient history sketch, the Toltecs or Mound Builders, some confirmation of the history. And there's not a lot of pictures today, and there's a lot of pronunciation challenges. So hopefully it goes fairly smooth. This is like raw, and I'm editing it as I go. This is just how I do it, how the sausage is made here. Um, so yeah, hopefully it's not too rough. I'm going to share my screen here. The entire screen shows my software and the PDF I'm reading from, and we'll jump into it. If you want to hear the rest of this book, go to the live tab, and there'll be all the other chapters there. So here we go. Wish me luck. Chapter 8, American Ancient History. If a consecutive history of the ancient people of Central America and Mexico were ever written, it has been lost. Probably nothing of the kind ever was written in the manner which we call history, although there must have been regular annals of some kind. The ruins show that they had the art of writing, and that at the south this art was more developed, more like a phonetic system of writing than that found in use among the Aztecs. The inscriptions of Palenque and the characters used in some of the manuscripts books. Whoops. All right. First edit already. Couldn't even make it a minute. The inscription. That's pretty normal, I guess, really. I got to keep an eye on this level. I want it to be at 45 minimum if I can. I don't know why it slips up and down. There we go. The inscriptions of Palenque and the characters used in some of the manuscript books that have been preserved are not the same as the Mexican picture writing. It is. Let's see. It is known that the books or manuscript writings were abundant among them in the ages previous to the Aztec period. They had an accurate measure of the solar year and a system of chronology, and many of their writings were historical. Among the Mayas and in other communities of the same family, writing was largely used in the time of the Spaniards. It was common also among the Aztecs, but they used picture writing. Las Casas wrote on this point as follows: It should be known that in all the commonwealths of these countries, in the kingdoms of New Spain and elsewhere, among other professions duly filled by suitable persons, was that of chronicler and historian. These chroniclers had knowledge of the origin of the kingdoms and of whatever related to religion and the gods, as well as to the founders of towns and cities. They recorded the history of kings and of the modes of their election and succession, of their labors, actions, wars, and memorable deeds, good and bad, of the virtuous men or heroes of former days, their great deeds, the wars they had waged, and how they had distinguished themselves, who had been the earliest settlers, what had been their ancient customs, their triumphs and defeats. They knew, in fact, whatever pertained to history and were able to give account of all past events. These chroniclers had likewise to calculate the days, months, and years, and though they had no writing like ours, they had their symbols and characters through which they understood everything, and they had great books which were composed with such ingenuity and art that our characters were really of no great assistance to them. Our priests have seen those books, and I myself have seen them likewise, though many were burned at the instigation of the monks, who were afraid they might impede the work of conversion. Books such as those here described by Las Casas must have contained important historical information. The older books, belonging to the ages of Copan and Palenque, went to decay doubtless long previous to his time, in the wars and revolutions of the Toltec period, or by the VIII. the wear of time. The older book, where am I? The older books, the later books should be right there. In the wars and revolutions of the Toltec period, or by the. Oh, I guess I do have to go back there. Sorry, I'm going to go back all the way to there. The older. Usually I'm doing it on a full screen. It's a little challenging in a half screen, but here we go. The older books, belonging to the ages of Copan and Palenque, went to decay doubtless long previous to his time in the wars and revolutions of the Toltec period, or by the wear of time. The later books, not otherwise lost, were destroyed by Aztec and Spanish vandalism. According to tradition and the testimony of writings still in existence when the Spaniards went there, the Aztec or Mexican sovereign Zocotl, Itzcoatl. Let me redo that. Itzcoatl. That's interesting word. Itzcoatl. According to tradition. Itzcoatl. I'm already having the burpees. Excuse me, I'm trying to. Okay, here we go. This is what happens when it's rough and raw. According to tradition and the testimony of writings still in existence when the Spaniards went there, the Aztec or Mexican sovereign Itzcoatl destroyed many of the old Toltec books. His aim was probably to exterminate among the people all memory of the previous times. Such things have been done with similar motives as we know in other countries by successful usurpers and conquerors. We learn from Spanish writers that a still greater destruction of the old books was effected by the more ignorant and fanatical of the Spanish priests who were established in the country as missionaries after the conquest. This is stated by Las Casas himself, one of the missionaries. Besides the many smaller bonfires, check. Besides the many smaller bonfires of this fanaticism, there is record of a great conflagration under the auspices of Bishop Zumagara. Let me do this one again here. I've got to get pronunciation from that one. I thought I would be able to get it off the top of my head. Sumaraga, 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 Bishop Sumaraga. Check. Besides the many smaller bonfires of this fanaticism, there is record of a great conflagration under the auspices of Bishop Sumaraga, in which a vast collection of these old writings was consumed. As the writing was all on paper, which had long been used in the country, the burning was easily accomplished. The old books not all lost. The Franciscan and Dominican fanatics, whose learning and religion consisted of ignorance and bigotry, hoped to exterminate among the people all recollection of their former history, ideas, and religious customs. A few of the books, however, escaped, none indeed that were very old, for it does not appear that any of the manuscripts rescued from destruction were written or copied earlier than the age which closed the Aztec domination. None of the great books of annals described by Las Casas are among them, but they relate to the ancient times, and most of them are copies or reproductions of much older books. Among these destroying Spanish ecclesiastics, there was here and there one who quietly secured some of the manuscripts or copies of them. These were kept from the flames. Others were secreted by the people, and subsequently, in years after the conquest was completed, some of the more intelligent churchmen wrote histories of the country or portions of it, which were preserved in manuscript. I'll just stop here. Figure 49, inscriptions carved on stone. This is one of the only pictures in this chapter, but it's pretty interesting. Hmm. Sahuagin, Sahagan, Sahagan, Sahagan. Should I check? I'm just going to check that quickly because it comes up a few times. This guy, Sahagan. I think it's going to be Sahagan. Saagun. Saagun. I should have known that. Saagun. Manuscript. Sahagun. Sahagun wrote such a history, which shows that he had studied the traditions and some of the old books. This work is printed in the great collection of Lord Kingsborough. Diogo, 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 Diego, Diego de Landa, first bishop of Yucatan, wrote a history of the Mayas and their country, which was preserved in manuscript at Madrid in the library of the Royal Academy of History. It is one of the most important works on the country written by a Spaniard because it contains a description and explanation of the phonetic alphabet of the Mayas. Landa's manuscript seems to have lain neglect in the library, for little or nothing was heard of it until the discovered. Landa. Let me redo that one here quickly. There's figure 50 in the meantime when I scroll down here. Manuscript writing again. Landa's manuscript seems to have lain neglected in the library, for little or nothing was heard of it until it was discovered and studied by Brasseur de Bourbourg, who by means of it had deciphered some of the old American writings. He says, "The alphabet and signs explained by Landa have been to me a Rosetta Stone." Figure 49 represents a specimen of the inscriptions as carved upon stone. Figure 50 gives them as they appear in manuscript. An extensive and important manuscript work written 200 years ago by Francisco Ximenes, an ecclesiastic, is preserved in Guatemala. He, being drawn to inquiries concerning the antiquities and ancient history of the country, was able to get possession of several of the old books, one of them being that known as Popol Vuh. His manuscript, arranged in 4 great volumes, one of which it is said has disappeared, contains valuable information in regard to the ancient history and traditions of Guatemala. One of the volumes has a copy of the Popol Vuh in the native tongue, and another has a Spanish translation of the work. He left also a manuscript dictionary of the principal Guatemalan dialects, which belonged to the Maya family, entitled Tesoro de las Lengua Quiche. That one's Cockachel, Zuohil, Zuohil. Let me just double check that quick. That C word is much easier than it looks. Kaka. Where is it? There it is. Cockchical. 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 Tuohil. Cockchical. Tuohil. Probably other manuscripts of the same character exist at Madrid and in Central America, which are not yet known to those who can understand their importance. As already stated, none of the great books of annals have been discovered, but some of the old American manuscripts now preserved in several of the libraries and private collections of Europe are important. 3 are specified as particularly valuable to students of American antiquity. That called the Codex Chimapoca. I got that one wrong. That's called the Chimapopoca. Chimapopoca. That called the Codex Chimapopoca, an old Toltec book written in the Toltec language, one now entitled the Codex Chacaquil. Is that the same word? thought it was the same word. Yeah, it is. I already got it wrong. What is it again? Chakakil. Kak. Kakchikel. 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 One now entitled the Codex Kakchikel. One now entitled the Codex Kakchikel and the Popol Vuh. The latter, written in the Quiche dialect, was translated into Spanish 200 years ago by Ximenes, but his translation remained in Guatemala unprinted and quite unknown until it was discovered in our time. Brasseur de Bourbourg, who is master of the Quiche language and to whom we are indebted for most that is known in the manuscripts of Ximenes, thought this Spanish translation very imperfect. Therefore, he has translated the work into French. The Popol Vuh was written in 1558 as an abridged reproduction of a very ancient Quiche book, which contained an account of the history, traditions, religion, and cosmology of the Quiches. Cosmogony. Cosmogony, not cosmology. Damn it. All right, you have to go back to that beginning of that sentence. It should be right there. Yeah. Good thing I caught that. Cosmogony. The Popol Vuh was written in 1558 as an abridged reproduction of a very ancient Quiche book, which contained an account of the history, traditions, religion, and cosmogony of the Quiches. The first part of it is devoted to the cosmogony and traditional lore. The rest gives an account of the Quiches, who, at the time of the conquest, were the dominant people in Central American regions south of the Great Forest. If the history were consecutive and clear, it would not take us back into the past more than 3 or 4 centuries beyond 1558. For the Quiche domination was probably not much older than that of the Aztecs. But the history is not clear. Putting aside the mythical and legendary portion of it, which relates to origins and migrations, we can see that it extends over some 14 generations, which may indicate that Quiche became an independent and ruling power about 1200 AD. For those who study the book in its full check. For those who study the book, it is full of interest. It shows us their conceptions of the supreme being and his relation to the world. It enables us to see what they admire in character as virtue, heroism, nobleness, and beauty. It discloses their mythology and their notions of religious worship. In a word, it bears witness to the fact that the various families of mankind are all of one blood, so far at least as to be precisely alike in nature. The cosmogony. Cosmogony. Did I say cosmogony before? The cosmogony. I can't go back and fix it now. The cosmogony and the mythical lore of the Quiches seem to have their root in the beliefs and facts of a time far more ancient than the national beginning of this people. In assuming the form in which we find them, they must have passed through several phases of growth, which changed their appearance and obscured their meaning. Manifestly, the history of the country did not begin with the Quiches. The account of their creation, with everything else in this cosmogony and mythology, is original, like the civilization to which they belong. According to the Popol Vuh, the world had a beginning. There was a time when it did not exist. Only heaven existed below, which all space was an empty, silent, unchanging solitude. Nothing existed there, neither man, nor animal, nor earth, nor tree. Then appeared a vast expanse of water on which divine beings moved in brightness. They said earth, and instantly the earth was created. It came into being like a vapor. Mountains rose above the waters like lobsters and were made. Thus was the earth created by the heart of heaven. Next came the creation of animals. But the gods were disappointed because the animals could neither tell their names nor worship the heart of heaven. Therefore, it was resolved that man should be created. First, man was made of earth, but his flesh had no cohesion. He was inert, could not turn his head, and had no mind, although he could speak. Therefore, he was consumed in the water. Next, men were made of wood, and these multiplied, but they had neither heart nor intellect, and could not worship, so they withered up and disappeared in the waters. A third attempt followed, Man was made of a tree called zit, and women of the pith of a reed, but these failed to think, speak, or worship and were destroyed, all save a remnant which still exists as a race of small monkeys found in forests. A fourth attempt to create the human race was successful, but the circumstances attending this creation are veiled in mystery. It took place before the beginning of dawn when neither sun nor moon had risen, and was a wonder work of the heart of heaven. Four men were created, and they could reason, speak, and see in such a manner as to know all things at once. They worshipped the Creator with thanks for existence, but the gods, dismayed and scared, breathed clouds on their eyes to limit their vision, and caused them to be men and not gods. Afterward, while the four men were asleep, the gods made for them beautiful wives, and from these came all the tribes and families of the earth. No account of the rescued fragments of this old literature of ancient America should omit giving due credit to Chevalier Botorini, the Milanese who went from Italy to America in 1735 as an agent of the Countess Santabeni, who claimed to be a descendant of Montezuma. He too was a devotee and believed that St. Thomas preached the gospel in America, but he had antiquarian tastes and was sufficiently intelligent to understand the importance of the old manuscripts, which had furnished so much fuel for the bonfires of fanaticism. Hey Cody, yeah, this one has got some challenging pronunciations, that's for sure. During the 8 years of his residence in Mexico and Central America, he hunted diligently for those still in existence and made a considerable collection, including in it some of the Mexican picture writings. But when about to leave, oops. But when about redo that guy quickly. But when about to leave, he was despoiled of his treasure and flung into prison by the Spanish viceroy. He finally left the country with a portion of them and was captured by an English cruiser and again despoiled. The manuscripts left in Mexico were finally sold at auction while Humboldt was there. He secured a portion of them. Another portion was brought to France about 1830 by Monsieur Aubin, who made important. I should have just let that go. Should have just let that go. But the editor in me needs to redo it. Another portion was brought to France about 1830 by Monsieur Aubin, who made important additions to it. Monsieur Aubin himself spent years searching for remains of the old writings, and he has now, it is supposed, the most valuable collection in Europe. It is likely that most of the recovered books may be translated by those who can bring to work habits of patient study and a thorough knowledge of the native dialects. Dictionaries of these dialects, as they were spoken at the time of the conquest, were prepared by some of the Spanish priests, and other facilities are not wanting. It is surprising, however, that no one has translated the Codex Chimapopoca. Chimapopoca. It is surprising, however, that no one has translated the Codex Chimapopoca, which seems the most important if the language in which it is written is in fact sufficiently modern to be managed as easily as that of Popol Vuh. It must be translatable, for its general tenor is known and passages of it are quoted. Brasseur de Bourbourg states that he has undertaken a translation. But who will translate the inscriptions at Copan and Palenque? Is the language in which they were written an old form of speech from which the dialects of the Maya family, or a portion of them, were derived? They have not been translated. No one has found a clue to their meaning. The characters are understood, but they appear to show an older form of the language which at present cannot be deciphered. Brasseur de Bourbourg's Rosetta Stone, discovered in Landa's manuscript, will not serve him here. Another, more potent, must be found before these old inscriptions can be made to give up their secrets. The ancient history sketched. It is impossible to know what was contained in the books of annals written by the official chroniclers of these ancient American countries, for these books are lost. They existed at the time of the conquest, Some of them were seen and described by let me do that again. Some of them were seen and described by Las Casas. But so far as is known, none of these books of regular annals, such as he described, has escaped destruction. Therefore, it is impossible to know anything certainly of their character as histories. The books the books preserved furnish The books preserved furnish little more than vague outlines of the past with obscure views of distinct periods in the history created by successive dominations of different peoples or different branches of the same people. What they enable us to know of the old history resembles what is known of the early times of the Greeks, who had no ancient histories excepting such as were furnished by their poets of the cycle. In one case, we are told of Pelasgians, Lelages, oof, Lelages, Cadmeans, Argives, and Aeolians. In one case, that one caught me off guard. Pelasgians, that's both ways they say. In one case, we are told of Pelagians, Lelages, Cadmeans, Argives, and Aeolians, very much as in the other, we are told of Coluas, Chichimex, Canamenes, Kinames. I better redo that. Nawas. Let's see here. Let me do that whole thing quickly. The cycle. Cadmeans. Archives. Let me just double check some stuff. Get my assistant to help me with some of these. The Argives. Is that Argives? Argives? Argives. Wow. Argives. Aeolians, Colwas, Chichimex, Kinames. Let me just double check that one. Kinames. This will be a tough sentence. Kinames. Oh, of course they're telling me it's not a real name. Kinametzin. Kinametzin. That's saying my assistants tell me it doesn't appear in this book. Are you kidding me? It's right there in front of me. Kinametzin. All right, let me just go for it. Let's see. What's of the cycle? Colwas, Chichimex, Nawas. In one case, we are told of the Pelagians, Lelages, Cadmeans, Argives, and Aeolians, very much as in the older. In one case, we are told of Pelagians, Lelages, Cadmeans, Argives, and Aeolians, very much as in the other, we are told of Colwas, Chichimex, Kinames, and Nawas. But the outline is not wholly dark. It does not exclude the possibility of a reasonable attempt at hypothesis. When Cortez entered Mexico, the Aztecs, Montezuma's people, had been in power for more than 2 centuries. Most of the ancient history of which something is said in these books relates to ages previous to their time and chiefly to their predecessors, the Toltecs. According to these writings, the country where the ruins are found was occupied in successive periods by 3 distinct peoples, the Chichimex, the Colwas, and the Toltecs, or Nawas. The Toltecs are said to have come into the country about 1,000 years before the Christian era. Their supremacy appears to have ceased and left the country broken up into small states 2 or 3 centuries before the Aztecs appeared. They were preceded by the Colwas, by whom this old civilization was originated and developed. The most ancient people, these found in the country by the. Let me redo that guy quickly. The most ancient people, those found in the country by the Kolwas, are called Chichimecs. They are described as a barbarous people who lived by hunting and fishing and neither. They are described as a barbarous people who lived by hunting and fishing and had neither towns nor agriculture. This term Chichimecs appears to have been a generic appellation for all uncivilized aborigines. Brasseur de Bourbourg says, under the generic name Chichimecs, which has much embarrassed some writers, the Mexican tradition includes the whole aboriginal population of the New World, and especially the people by whom it was first occupied at the beginning of time. Some of the traditions state that the Koas came from the cat. Koas from the east. Some of the traditions state that the Kolwas came from the east in ships. Sahagun, Sahagun, Sahagun. Sahagun mentions that a tradition to this effect was current in Yucatan. The precise value of these traditional reports is uncertain, but if accepted as vague historical recollections, they could be. This is my text. Sorry. I should have my phone on mute, but I need it to be on for emergencies. The precise value of these traditional reports is uncertain, but if accepted as vague historical recollections, they could be explained by supposing the civilized people called Kolwas came from South America through the Caribbean Sea. Sorry, just give me a sec here. Came from South America through the. But if accepted as vague historical recollection, I'm going to have to start there at the semicolon, which is good with these old books. There's lots of areas to restart your sentence. But if accepted as vague historical recollections, they could be explained by supposing the civilized people called Kolwas came from South America through the Caribbean Sea and landed in Yucatan and Tabasco. They are uniformly described as the people who first established civilization and built great cities. They taught the Chichimecs to cook their food, cultivate the earth, and adopt the ways of civilized life. And the Chichimecs. Check. And the Chichimecs, civilized by their influence, are sometimes called Kinames. Let me just double check that quickly. Kinames, yeah, that's right. And the Chichimecs. And the Chichimecs, civilized by their influence, are sometimes called Kinames. The Kolwas are connected with vague references to a long and important period in the history previous to the Toltec ages. They seem to have been in some respects more advanced in civilization than the Toltecs. What is said of events in their history relates chiefly to their great city called Xibalba, the capital of an important kingdom to which this name was given. The Toltecs, in alliance with the uncivilized Chichimecs of the mountains, subjugated this city and kingdom, and thus brought to a close the period which may be termed Kolwan. This kingdom appears to have included Guatemala, Yucatan, Tabasco, Tehuantepec, Chiapas, Honduras, and other districts in Central America. And it may have included all southern Mexico, for places north of the Tampico River are mentioned as being within its limits when the Toltecs came into the country. Some of the principal seats of the Kolwan civilization were in the region now covered by the Great Forest. Some investigators have sought to identify the city of Xibalba with the ruined city known to us as Palenque. Brasseur de Bourbourg says, Palenque appears to have been the same city to which the books give the name of Xibalba. But this is nothing but conjecture. We may as reasonably suppose Copan, Quirigua, Quirigua, Quirigua. Thanks, Nubs and Cody. Appreciate it. Let's see, redo this here quickly. We may Quirigua, Quirigua, Quirigua. We may as reasonably suppose Copan, Quirigua, or some other old ruin to have been Xibalba. Those who attempt to believe this old American civilization was brought across the Atlantic by the Phoenicians in very remote times assume, against the plain testimony of the monuments, that the Colhuas came to America from some country on the Mediterranean. They may have come from some other part of this continent. In my judgment, it is not improbable that they came by the sea from South America. Brasseur de Bourbourg would say that there were people of the Atlantic race who, having escaped destruction by the cataclysm, found their way to Yucatan and Tabasco. But there is little beside conjecture to support any theory of their origin. We have only the fact that, according to the old books and traditions of the country, they occupied that region at a remote period and originated the civilization whose monuments are found there. Tradition places their first settlements on the Gulf Coast in Tabasco between Tehuantepec, Tehuantepec, Tehuantepec. Tradition places their first settlements on the Gulf Coast in Tabasco between Tehuantepec and Yucatan. It is inferred that the Mayas, Zendals, Quiches, and some other communities of the old race were descendants of the Colhuas, their speech being more highly developed than that of any native community not connected with this family, and their written characters having a close resemblance to those of the oldest inscriptions. The Toltecs are mound builders. As the remains of the mound builders show clearly that they had commercial intercourse with the Mexican and Central American countries, and as it seems probable that they had otherwise a very close relation to the people of those countries, it would be surprising to find no mention of their country in the old books and traditions of the Central Americans and Mexicans. If we could have lost those books, if we could have the lost books, not lost those books, that's a big difference and a mess up right there. If we could have the lost books, especially those of the more ancient time, and learn to read them, it might be possible to know something of the origin and history of the mound builders. It is believed that the distinct reference to their country has been found in the books still in existence, and there appears to be reason for this belief. Brasseur de Bourbourg, one of the few investigators who have explored them, says, previous to the history of the Toltec domination in Mexico, we notice in the annals of the country two facts of great importance, but equally obscure in their details. First, the tradition concerning the landing of a foreign race conducted by an illustrious personage who came from an eastern country, and second, the existence of an ancient empire known as Huehuetlapalan, from which the Toltecs or Nahuas came to Mexico in consequence of a revolution or invasion, and from which they had a long and toilsome migration to the Aztec plateau. He believes that Huehuetlapalan was the country of the mound builders in the Mississippi and Ohio valleys. According to the native books he has examined, it was somewhere at a distance in the northeast, and it is constantly said that some of the Toltecs came by land and some by sea. Sahagun, 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 Sahagun. Sahagun learned from the old books and traditions and stated in the introduction to the first book of his history that the Toltecs came from that distant northeastern country, and he mentions a company that came by sea, settled near the Tampico River, and built a town called Panuco. Brasseur de Bourbourg finds that an account of this or another company was preserved in Zelenio. 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 Let me just double check that one. That is something I need to look up or see if I looked it up previously quickly. I thought I did. I can't seem to find it. Sahuagin there it is. Zelenio. Shilenio, but I think it's more like Zelenio. I'm gonna slightly disagree with my assistant on this one. Zelenio. Shilenio. Zelenio. 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 These small words that have 4 syllables still. Brasseur de Bourbourg finds that Brasseur de Bourbourg finds that an account of this or another company was preserved at Zelenio, an ancient city situated on the point of an island between Lake Terminos and the sea, and famous for its commerce, wealth, and intelligence. The company described in this account came from the northeast in the same way, it is said, to the Tampico River and landed at Panuco. It consisted of 20 chiefs and a numerous company of people. Torquemada found a record which describes them as a people of fine appearance. They went forward into the country and were well received. He says they were industrious, orderly, and intelligent, and that they worked metals and were skillful artists and lapidaries. All the accounts say that the Toltecs came at different times, by land and sea, mostly in small companies and always from the northeast. This can be explained only by supposing they came by sea from the mouth of the Mississippi River, or from the Gulf Coast near it, or by land. I gotta do that again. Let me just quickly get to that. There. This can be explained only by supposing they came from sea. This can be explained only by supposing they came by sea from the mouth of the Mississippi River, or from the Gulf Coast near it, and by land through Texas. But the country from which they came was invariably Huehuetlapalan. Cabrera says Huehuetlapalan was the ancient country of the Toltecs. Its simple name was Lapalan, but they called it Huehue, old, to distinguish it from 3 other Tlapalans, which they founded in the districts of their new kingdom. Torquemada says the same. We are not authorized to reject the fact so distinctly stated and so constantly reported in the old books. The most we can do against it with any show of reason is to receive it with doubt. Therefore, it seems not improbable that the old Tlapalan of the Central American tradition was the country of our mound builders. Another circumstance mentioned is not without significance. It is said in connection with this account of the Toltec migration that Huehuetlapalan was successfully invaded by Chichimecs, meaning barbarous aboriginal tribes who were united under one great leader. Here is one statement, a little condensed, touching this point. There was a terrible struggle, but after about 13 years, the Toltecs, no longer able to resist successfully, were obliged to abandon their country to escape complete subjugation. 2 chiefs guided the march of the emigration nation. Excuse me. Back to the 2 chiefs. 2 chiefs. 2 chiefs guided the march of the emigrating nation. At length, they reached a region near the sea named Lapalan Conco, where they remained several years. But they finally undertook another migration and reached Mexico, where they built a town called Tolanzico, and later the city of Tulan, which became the seat of their government. This is substantially what is told of the defeat and migrations of the Toltecs. It's lit chittle zochittle. Let me just. I got to spend a second reading this word. This is substantially what is. It's zit till zochittle. It's till zochittle. The history of Itztil the history of Itztil Itzlil 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 The history of the history of Itziljochitl the history of Itzlilzochitl adds doubtful modifications and particulars not found in the Codex Chimalpopoca. Fucking Chima, I got too many popos in there. The history of Zochitl, the history of the history of Itzlilzochitl adds doubtful modifications and particulars not found in the Codex Chimalpopoca. And then I lose my voice in the end. Come on. See quatra, see quatra letters, etc. This Chichimec, see quatra letters, etc. This Chichimec invasion of Huehue Tlapalan is placed at a period which, in the chronology of the native books, was long previous to the Christian era, and is mentioned to explain the beginning of the Toltec movement toward Mexico. But the account of it is still. Why is my record level down? Come on, stay up there for a bit longer. But the account of it is obscure. To find a system of chronology in these old books is not surprising when we consider that even the Aztecs of Montezuma's time knew enough of astronomy to have a correct measure of the year. The Aztecs adopted the methods of astronomy and chronology which were used by their predecessors. They divided the year into 18 months of 20 days each. But as this gave the year only 360 days, 5 supplementary days were added to each year, and a sixth day to every fourth year. This bisextile is known to have been used by the Mayas, Zendals, and Quiches, and it was probably common. We cannot reasonably refuse to give some attention to their chronology, even while doubting its value as a means of fixing dates and measuring historical periods. Its method was to count by equal periods of years, as we count by centuries, and their chronology presents a series of periods which carries back their history to a very remote time in the past. Brasseur de Bourbourg says, in the histories written in the Wattle language, the oldest certain date is 955 years before Christ. This, he means, is the oldest date in the history of the Nahuas or Toltecs, which has been accurately determined. The calculation by which it is found is quoted from the later portion of the Codex Chimalpopoca as follows: 6 times 400 years plus 113 years previous to the year 1558 AD. This is given as the date of a division of the land by the Nahuas. The division was made 2,513 years previous to 1558 AD, or in 955 BC. If this date could be accepted as authentic, it would follow that the Nahuas or Toltecs left Huehue Tlapalan more than 1,000 years previous to the Christian era, for they dwelt a long time in the country of Xibalba as peaceable settlers before they organized the civil war which raised them to power. Some confirmation of this history. That the ancient history of the country was something like what is reported in the old writings seems not improbable when we consider the condition in which the native population was found 350 years ago. This shows that Mexico and Central America had been subjected to disrupting political changes caused by violent transfers of supreme influence from one people to another several times in the course of a long history. Such a history is indicated by the monuments, and its traces were noticeable in peculiarities of the native inhabitants of the various districts at the time of the Spanish conquest. They are still manifest to travelers who study the existing representatives of the old race and the old dialects sufficiently to find them. There were several distinct families or groups of language, and in many cases, the people represented by each family of dialects were in a state of separation or disruption. To a considerable extent, they existed in fragmentary communities, sometimes widely separated. The most important group of related dialects was that which included the speech of the Mayas, Quiches, and Zendals, which it is supposed represented the language of the original civilizers, the Kolwas. Dialects of this family are found on both sides of the Great Forest. There were other dialects supposed to indicate Toltec communities, and there were communities south of Mexico and Nicaragua, and even farther south, which used the Aztec speech. Very likely, all these differing groups of language came originally from the same source and really represent a single race, but comparative philology has not yet reported on them. Mention is made of another people called Waknas or Caribs, and conjecture sees in them remains of the Aboriginal barbarians termed Chichimecs. Waknas. I better redo that. Chichamac. What's he saying? Chicamac. Chicamac. Chicha. Well, yeah, I think it's Cheech, but I mean, I'm not going to argue with an actual Chichamac. Um, Let me see here. Well, I'm going to redo that one because I want to redo that name. Wakeness. Wakeness. Let me just see what they say about that one. Wakenaz. I say it's Wakenaz. Huh. Uh, oh, now they're telling me again it's not a word. Come on. It's right there, dude. Wakas. Wakas. Well, I had it right though. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it then. Original barbarians termed Chichimecs. So it's telling me it's Wakas. Wakas. So that's what I did. I'm gonna leave it there. They dwelt chiefly in the dense, dank forests found growing on the low alluvion of the Atlantic coast. So far as is known, their speech had no affinity with that of any other native community. People of this race constitute a chief element in the mixed population of the Mosquito Coast, known as Moscos. In Yucatan, the old inhabitants were Mayas, and people using dialects related to theirs were numerous in Tabasco, Chiapas, Guatemala, and the neighboring districts, which all around the country were scattered communities supposed to be of Toltec origin, as their speech could not. Hmm. I'm going to cheat on this one. As their speech could not be classed with these dialects nor with that of the Aztecs. The most reasonable explanation of this condition of the people is that furnished by the old chronicles and traditions. The country must have been occupied during successive periods by different peoples who are represented by these broken communities and unlike groups of language. When all the native writings still in existence shall have been translated, and especially when the multitude of inscriptions found in the ruins shall have been deciphered, we may be able to see in a clear light the ruins, the people, and their history. And that's it for chapter 8. Well, good to see you guys here. Yeah, Altrusian Grace is here. Oh boy. Embarrassing to have you watch me read, dude. Yeah, I'm going to do the Popol Vuh soon, he says. Not looking forward to this. Once you get the gist of the Aztec type pronunciations, like all these, it'll come easier than you think. It's just weird when you're doing it live. It's way worse. Like when I'm doing it on my own, I can just rip off a bunch of wrong ones without worrying about it. I like the words large on the left, but would prefer your image being larger on the left with the graph being the small. It feels more. Oh boy, I don't think YouTube can do that. I was trying to, like, I had my image over the words, but I thought that's dumb um because you guys should see the words more than the audio, right? But I think this is the only option for YouTube. I mean, I was gonna try streaming it through something else, and like I agree with you. It'd be nice if the image was here and then the little this little audio thing only needs to be so big, right? It's kind of taking up way too much of the screen, but anyways, I'm just glad that I'm able to do this without changing my process too much. And yeah, it's yeah, check out Altrusian Grace if you guys like audiobooks. Big shout out to Altrusian Grace Media. Matt is an amazing narrator, and he's doing a very similar thing. Oh, it meant the words large on the left and your image large. Oh, yeah. I mean, can I do that? Yeah, maybe I can do that, but then we won't see the recording software, which is fine. But I think Darren kind of wanted to show that it's actually like recording, like it's actually happening, like we're actually doing it instead of just like with all the AI stuff happening these days and all that. But yeah, I'll look at to see if there's an option to do that instead and play around with it a little bit. But I think YouTube's pretty stuck on this format, and I tried to do it on StreamYard, but that doesn't work either really with the sharing of the screen properly. Or there was some problems with StreamYard. I can't remember what it was now, but maybe I can try that again too. Anyways, yeah, tomorrow will be chapter 9, the Aztec civilization. This is kind of an interesting book. Keep the wave file, just increase your image. Oh, you can do that? You can increase your image? Okay, I'll try that. I don't know how to do it, but I will talk to you. I'll text you and ask you for some help. Yeah, anyways, yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. I guess I could stop sharing now and connect with everybody. Oh, thanks, Green Tea. They like both of us, Matt. That's awesome. I mean, some of these old books are really interesting because they really show how different they were thinking back then as scientists, and they seem more open in some ways. Also, a little more racist, which is understandable, I guess. But yeah, that's it. So we're over halfway through this book already. So we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Love you all.